NEO4Js a million times faster. Humanity will get to Mars 2 years earlier.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another Tech Times exclusive. Today we're talking to NEO4J CEO and co-founder Emil Eifrem. NEO4J provides the leading graph database software, which is used by Fortune 500 companies, smaller companies. Like they really covered this market for a graph database. And what graph database does, it really finds patterns in data and builds applications ranging from recommendations, fraud detection, AI and machine learning applications. And right now, something that you guys are probably familiar with, if you're watching this video, is the PANAMA Papers. Emil, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
Absolutely. So, we can just jump right in, and you can, just tell us a little bit about yourself, some of your background, and also that of NEO4J.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Emil Eifrem. I'm the CEO and co-founder of NEO4J. And my background is I'm a computer scientist. I'm a developer by birth almost, and background and education. So I grew up as a compulsive programmer. Used to write software, in my basement in my teenage years, rather than being out, in the sun and enjoy life. Was born in Sweden, and then I ended up studying computer science, and founded this company called NEO4J together with my two co-founders. We came up with the idea at our previous startup, which built enterprise content management systems, and where we're struggling with a database. We were using a standard off-the-shelf database. You can think like an Oracle or an IBM DB2, which works with tables as abstractions, right? Rows and columns, right? So all of your information has to be shoved into tables, and that is a powerful model for a lot of applications. But we ran into problems with it, and it, rather than accelerating our development, which had been my experience to date, it ended up slowing us down and causing problems. And so anyways, we looked at the database, took a long, hard look, and realized that, you know what, I think we can build something better, something more modern. And that was the moment when we decided to build what today is called graph databases and NEO4J.
So I'm sure some people are not, familiar with NEO4J, but I think it's important to let everyone know that you recently secured the largest investment in database history. Could you tell us a little bit about the obvious importance of that to not only your company, but to what you are trying to provide to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe let me take a little bit of a step back and talk, about the database market as a whole, and then I'll zoom into specifically our latest in investment round. So databases, it seems like an obscure part of kind of the technology landscape, right? But fundamentally, absolutely everything that we do in our digital daily lives with these things, it's all about producing, consuming, and communicating information. That's all we do, right? All of that information ultimately lands in the database. It's at the heart of the technology infrastructure, which means it's at the heart of modern society, right? And this means that it's actually the biggest market in all of enterprise software. It's a $50 billion market today, and it's growing exceptionally fast. And so it's projected to hit 100 billion over the next 4 or 5 years, right? And so it's a massive market becoming even bigger, right? And as part of that, it used to be based on exactly one type of data model. This is the stuff that I mentioned before with rows and columns. It's called a relational database, or it's called an SQL database. So that's the same thing. And that was the predominant model. In fact, it was the only model that existed for a long time. Yes, there were different vendors, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, and so on and so forth. But basically the product, they were, I don't know, 95%, 97% the same product, right? There's some differences on the margins, but it's basically the same product. So that was true it was invented in the 70s, in the 80s, it was true in the 90s, it was true in the 2000s. And then in the 2010s, something happened where all of a sudden we had this avalanche of information because of mobile devices, because of sensors, for a variety of different reasons that ushered in this era of experimentation. So all of a sudden we went from a universe of having a handful of database vendors, right? 5 basically, right? To today, over 350 different new database projects that have been founded. So it's just this Cambrian explosion of choice, alternatives, experimentation. So that was the early part of the previous decade. What has happened over the past 3-4 years is that the market is starting to converge again. And there's a new handful of players that have been chosen. They've reached escape velocity. They have commercial momentum. They've broken through the glass ceiling, and they are executing against this massive big market. And one of them is graph databases, and specifically NEO4J. And so as part of that, investors saw that, wait, if you add all these things together, biggest market, going through a transformation, the relational database is not going anywhere, like it's still going to be around, but the growth, the excitement, the new, that's all happening with a handful of new vendors, of which NEO4J is one. And so that's why we were able to secure this biggest round in database history, and we're really excited about it.
Yeah, that's incredible. It just makes sense, like you said, and it's obviously absolutely not going anywhere. So like if anything, it's going to just continue to I guess explode is the right word to use here. So what really inspired you to say, this is what I'm doing?
It's a great question. It's a combination of 2 things. One is, and that was the main driver, which is personal frustration, just an itch that we wanted to scratch, right? And I'll go into that a little bit more. And then the second piece was some amount of, maybe let's call it strategic clarity, or a belief, at least, that the world was going in a particular direction. So let me unpack both of them, right? So the personal itch was what I mentioned before. We had this previous startup where we built enterprise content management. We had a lot of data that didn't fit very well into these well-structured tables, right? And remember how I mentioned that the relational database was invented in the 70s. If you think back to what we used computers for in the 70s, these things didn't exist. Like, mobile devices didn't exist, social media didn't exist, like none of what we today take for granted, YouTube, like none of that existed, of course, back in the 70s. What businesses used computers for was basically digitalizing business processes, right? In other words, you had someone, like a person, filling out a form manually with pen and paper. You wanted to take that form and put it into the computer. That's basically what it was used for, right? And then you can just look at that data. Like, what's the shape of that data? It's super tabular, right? It's super well structured, right? So it makes sense that the invention, like, okay, let's figure out what's the smartest way to store this. It makes sense that would be rows and columns, right? Fast forward to today, we have this explosion of information that is not just more, but also much more complex. It's highly connected, right? And so that's the universe that we bumped into at our previous startup, where information just tightly coupled, it evolved very rapidly, changed all the time. And we took that and we tried to squeeze it into these square and static and predefined tables. And it was just very painful. And so we had, I was the CTO at this company, right? And we had like 20 engineers, and half of them spent the majority of their time just fighting against the relational database. And that was super frustrating for us, because in all our previous projects, the database had been an accelerator. It took this big, gnarly problem and took it off our table and said, you know what, you can focus on solving the business problem, right? The database, will take care of all the hard stuff about storing the data, make sure that it's backed up and like all the good stuff that a database does. But that didn't happen in that project. And so ultimately we started thinking about, hey, what's going on here? What's happening? And it was a fundamental mismatch between the shape of the data and the building blocks exposed by the relational database. And so that was the trigger that caused us to start looking around and going back to first principles, right? You know, you and I in the pre-briefing, we talked about Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX and all that kind of stuff. And he's a great first principles thinker, right? And we're in no way, you know, near the caliber of Elon Musk, of course, but we reached for some of those same kind of conceptual frameworks around, okay, first principles, like why do you even try to put data in rows and columns? Right. And once you start thinking about that, it comes back to that, the main use cases for databases when the relational database was invented were those forms, those paper forms. And that's just not true anymore. So why do we keep going back to this? So once we got back to first principles, we started thinking about what would be the most amazing inspiration, right, in terms of the greatest database approach out there. And once you start thinking about that, you realize that actually it's not in software. Like the greatest database that at least I've ever been able to that I've seen is the human brain. It's right in here. It's and how does that work? Well, it's neurons connected to other neurons through synapses. And so we looked at that. It's like, wait, that's forming a network. And another word for network in mathematics is called graph, right? So that's why when Mark Zuckerberg talks about the social graph, he means the social network, right? Like nodes. And so we said, what if we build a database inspired by the human brain, which takes nodes and relationships between these nodes and then key value properties onto both of them, right? If we do that, all of a sudden we can model everything. And we have a data model that fits really well with how the modern way works, with mobile devices, with the shift to the cloud, with AI and machine learning, with social media, with all of that kind of stuff, right? And so that was how it ultimately happened.
Yeah, but you're very right. Yeah, that's there's no way, and it's not only in a matter of 50 years. You know, what we consider to be changes, you know, that you would assume happen over a 50-year span. That's not what we're seeing here. We are seeing now. You see technology and advancements that are happening in mere months that was before you would imagine would take 10 years. Like,
You're exactly right. There's an accelerated pace of change.
Yeah, so it's incredible. So those 50 years is really, if there was some way to quantumly break this down, it's probably like 1,000 years ago when you think about, like, you know,
that's exactly right.
You know, from then to now. So it's a completely different world, not even remotely close. Like,
you're completely right. And then if you then combine, like I said, there were two drivers. One was the personal itch that we wanted to scratch. And the other one is related to what you just said, which is, okay, the world, like the pace is picking up and the world is becoming increasingly connected. And that was very clear, right? And I think anyone would agree with that. That's not a controversial statement that everything is becoming more connected. But there's a knock-on effect from that, though, which is that what is data? Like data ultimately describes the real world, right? And if the world then is becoming more connected and data is describing the real world, then data is becoming more connected. And the more connected data you have, the more pressure you're exerting against that previous paradigm, the relational database or the SQL database. So that was the second piece, like that maybe strategic clarity or the belief of where the world was going was that, all right, if we have this problem today, like we don't know how many other people had it at the time, but the one thing we knew, the one thing we had this massive faith in was that tomorrow there's going to be more. And the next day there's going to be more because the world is just becoming more and more connected.
Right, absolutely. I guess you could call that like a foresight, maybe the proper word to use here, but like you've seen, you know, and for anyone in your field with your background, I think it was, you know, as obvious as the nose on our faces that this is happening. And there, you know, it's either roll with it or get ran over by it. Right. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So you guys jumped in and you know, as we discussed earlier with the investment that you received are killing it, obviously, you know. So, but let's jump back down a little bit and tell us exactly why maybe a specific company would seek to use your, I don't know if it's fair to call it a service or, to use your software. Like what are the benefits there?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And so it of course depends on what the company is, but let's take a common example. Let's say you're a retailer today, right? And we have 7 of the 10 biggest retailers in the world are actually using Neo4j today. So it's a very, very popular vertical, a popular industry for graph databases and Neo4j, including, for example, Sainsbury's, right? Which of course is a local UK example, but there's a range of other massive retailers, right? And you might be shifting to, okay, I've moved everything online, of course, a long time ago, but that all of a sudden got accelerated with COVID. And all of a sudden I'm realizing that, you know what, in order to be a modern retailer, I have to provide really strong recommendations, right? And personalization, right? So then when Chris logs on, to that retailer's website, it should be personalized for Chris, and you should do recommendations based on that, and so on and so forth. And ideally, you want to marry that up with Chris's offline purchase history. So in case maybe you go to that retailer locally, and then sometimes you shop online, right? You want that to be coupled together, right? And at that point, you realize that, okay, I can't buy that off the shelf. And in fact, it's a core competency of mine as a modern retailer. Like that's an IT, like you have to have that skill set, right? And so then you need a technical platform to be able to do these recommendations and personalizations and customer 360. And once you start thinking through that, you realize that, you know what? That information is highly connected because it's Chris going to a certain, web page on my site, and then to another one, and then to another one. And based on that history, you want to do a recommendation. And based on if let's say this is maybe it's a home improvement retailer, right? And then you put like a hammer into your shopping cart, like I want to work on my vacation house, right? I can't travel globally because it's COVID, so I want to work on my vacation house. I put a hammer in my shopping cart, and then they want to look and they want to say that, you know what, for a hammer, let's apply a discount and a promotion to nails. So if you buy a hammer and nails, you actually get a discount, right? That's all about like, what are the hammers connected to? It's like actually connected to nails, right? And then Chris, as he's navigating the website, he leaves this audit trail, this click stream, which is also a connected data structure. And then, you know what? Then maybe Emil is also in the system because maybe I also shop there, like either online or physically. And all of a sudden we see that we find the pattern that between Chris has bought these 3 products. You know what? Emil has bought those 3 products as well. Let's take a 4th product that Emil has bought that Chris hasn't and recommend that to him. You can just see how big of a connected data set that is. And that is when, Neo4j is, not even 50% faster, but 1,000 times better, 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times. We frequently have customers telling us that Neo4j is 1,000,000 times faster than a relational database for those types of use cases. So that's a recommendation or personalization or personalization or customer 360 use case. So that's one example, right, for retail. Maybe I'll give you one more for another vertical, and then we can move on. Yes, sure. So I happen to mention fraud detection. That's because I was thinking another great example is in financial services, right? And so all the 20 biggest banks in North America are Neo4j users today, right? So it's a massively big vertical for us. And a great example there is fraud detection, right? So other fraud detection software can find anomalies, right? Like, so you look at a number of transactions and then you see that this one looks weird. It's an anomaly. Let's investigate that one, right? So that's popular, right?
Right.
But what you can do with a graph database is that what if you have a number of transactions? Each and every one of them individually is not an anomaly. It looks normal, but they're connected in fraudulent ways. So this is, for example, fraud rings. Like the only way you can really capture that is if you can operate and connect the data, which is where graph databases come in. And so what we see customers in financial services, we see them detecting anywhere from 2 to 3 up to 5% more fraud by being able to capture fraud rings. And these big global banks, we're talking billions of dollars of transactions, or euros, or choose your currency of transactions. So finding just 1% or 2%, or that's massive, right? And so that's another example of the type of stuff where people end up using Neo4j.
Right. Okay. You reminded me of something that happened to me about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 10. Well, maybe 10 years. I had recently opened a new bank account, and then like just a couple months later, I went on a trip, and I ended up I used my card in Kuwait, and then later that afternoon, I used my card in Saudi. And then later that afternoon, I made a withdrawal in Manila. And,
wow.
Yeah, and it was all in like a 24-hour period, and they shut me down.
Of course.
Of course. Yeah, I had to call. So, and I was like, man, they are on it. But I guess it's that automated system is just boom, red flag. Like this guy has, traveled halfway across the world in 24 hours, and he's spending money as he goes. And, I appreciate it. I was not the least bit upset. I was like, well, thank goodness, that there is that service. And like I said, that was 10 or 12 years ago. So that's, it's almost like the caveman days as far as like, where we compared to where we are now. I think I still had MySpace at the time, maybe. I'm not even, yeah. But actually something I wanted to ask you about, and it's a little off topic, but I thought of it as well when you were speaking about the recommendations and how you get like items and things like that. This is obviously a very powerful tool for companies and businesses. How do you feel? What is your opinion, your personal opinion, on certain companies, maybe tech companies, maybe not, kind of using this technology, I don't want to say for evil, but it's definitely not in the most ethical manner?
That's a great question, and it's one that I think any horizontal technology provider, or really any tool provider, they have to consider, right? And maybe it even transcends beyond technology, like at least beyond software. I happen to mention, in my recommendation example from before, that you put a hammer into your shopping cart to buy a hammer, right? Well, let's think about a hammer, right? Like a hammer, you can use a hammer to hit someone on the head, or you can take a hammer and you can build a house so that people have shelter, over their heads, right? And so like it's very much one of those things that you provide this neutral technology, and then people can use it for many things, right? And I think that some of that, like I don't think as horizontal technology providers that we can abdicate responsibility. I think we have some responsibility for it. However, a lot of it, like, you can't police all the use cases, and it also becomes fairly subjective after a while. Like for one person, like this thing might be, military purposes might be unethical. For other people, it's the most ethical thing you can do to defend your country. So it becomes very subjective after a while. What we tend to do here at Neo4j is focus on what we maybe also subjectively, but maybe not that subjectively after all, believe to be really positive use cases. Right. So I'll give you an example. NASA is on the record saying that thanks to Neo4j, humanity will get to Mars 2 years earlier, which is pretty damn cool, right? Like, so NASA is using Neo4j. It's actually amongst, they have a wide variety of use cases inside of NASA, but one of the first ones was in Project Orion. So this is the mission to Mars, where they were at a complete, they were desperate because they had a problem with Orion, with the return capsule, where in all their simulations it didn't work, and they were trying to find a way to fix the problem by looking into their massive lessons learned database, which has 50 years of engineering mistakes that NASA's done. Like, it's a very disciplined engineering organization, right? And as engineer, you know that mistakes that's a good thing. Like, you learn from mistakes. That's how you progress. Like failure, is you talk about failure is not an option, right? Like in the mission. Well, you get there by failing in a bunch of different ways as you build the product, right? And they record all of those, the failures and what they did in order to rectify them. And they couldn't find it. They couldn't find it because they had stored that in an old type of technology, a combination of a search engine and a relational database. And then they moved that into Neo4j, and within hours, they had found a solution to the problem that fixed this thing. And the next best thing they had after that was the last thing they tried. The next best thing would have been to redo it from scratch, which would have delayed them 2 years. Right. So that's an amazing kind of positive impact. And another example is, I personally know over 20 independent projects where where people use Neo4j to find the cure for cancer, right? Which is just quite amazing. Like if all I can do is in some way just increase the probability by just 1%, right? Nothing else, that we find the cure for cancer, that'd be amazing. And then my third example of positive, and maybe this is a cue up for a topic we're going to spend some time on, is the Panama Papers, or more recently the Pandora Papers, which you alluded to in your lead into the segment, right? Which is this massive leak, the biggest leak in journalistic history, right? In data journalism history, which has this big record of where the rich and the powerful, how they use offshore bank accounts to sometimes do legal tax planning and sometimes do illegal tax evasion. And they use Neo4j to mine that data, to sift through all that complex data and find politicians in there, prominent people, and hold them accountable. And so that's a great example, I think, of the purpose, like serving democracy, right? Serving journalism and investigative journalism, which I think is a really central part of an open and democratic society. So those are the types of things that we tend to focus on, where Neo4j actually advances society and has an impact for the positive.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I understand completely. For me personally, if NASA was to reach out to me and tell me that my software has gotten them to Mars 2 years earlier, that would almost be my crowning moment. Like where do you go from there?
It's pretty amazing, and as you can imagine, we're a technology organization, so we have a lot of space geeks, at Neo4j, myself included. So it was just an amazing thing to see that happen. But then also, like we talked about the cure for cancer, that's I think equally inspiring. And one of the vaccine manufacturers, we can't yet, I think we'll be able to go public with who it is, but one of the major manufacturers and distributors of vaccine against COVID, they told us privately, though again, I think we'll be able to speak publicly about it at some point, but they told us privately that thanks to Neo4j, the vaccine rollout was significantly accelerated because they used Neo4j. Once the vaccine was invented, right, then it became a distribution game, and that distribution game became a supply chain game. And you can think about a supply chain. It used to be that a normal company that is producing stuff, physical goods, would have a 1, maybe a 2, maybe a 3 hop deep supply chain, right? Fast forward to today, and any company has 20, 30 levels deep supply chain network, right? And the only way to make sense of that is by digitalizing it. And that is a 20, 30 levels deep, graph or network, which you can't shove into a relational database. You really have to use a graph database for that. And so this big vaccine manufacturer, COVID vaccine manufacturer, they use Neo4j to optimize that supply chain, as well as optimize the flow internally at their factories. And through that, shaved off weeks, if not months, of getting the vaccine out into the hands of the world population. And just the impact of that as well is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is incredible. How would you describe, or how would you feel about Neo4j driving innovation?
It's a great question. I think when you have these types of fundamental advantages in terms of, I mentioned before that our customers frequently report that we're 1,000 times faster or 1,000,000 times faster, then you typically, it's not just that you see I was able to buy servers, a year later because we were slightly faster. No. If you're 1,000 times faster, that enables you to do completely new things, right? Which is what innovation is all about, right? And I gave the example of like a recommendation or personalization example, right? And this is an area where ultimately, if you're a traditional retailer, you just couldn't do this before. But thanks to graph databases and Neo4j, it just allows them to do completely new things and generate these recommendations based on offline data and new data, and the stuff that people are generating on the websites, and marry the two together. That was something that was previously not doable. And this is also where the fact that we're open source comes in, right? So we have an open source edition, Neo4j Community Edition. You can just go to neo4j.com. So that's neo4j.com and download it completely for free. You don't even have to register, right? And you get this fully featured graph database, and you can just go crazy, and you can just build whatever you want. And that is how the Panama and the Pandora Papers originally happened. We had no idea. These were just journalists that picked it up, started using it for free, and used it to understand, make sense of the biggest leak in journalistic history, right? Without us even knowing about it, right? How amazing is that? I'll give you another example. 99% of all airfare calculations today in the world use Neo4j. So in other words, if you're sitting, I'm in Malmö, Sweden, as we're recording this. What if I wanted to go to Neo4j headquarters in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley, right? I would go choose my favorite kind of aggregator for flights or my airline. And I would say, from Malmö, Sweden to San Francisco. And it's going to give me, there's one direct flight through Copenhagen. There's one from Frankfurt. You can fly through Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. or O'Hare in Chicago. These are all routes to get to that place. That's all a connected data structure, right? It's a perfect fit for graph databases. And so that all happened, like people played around with this and without us even knowing about it. And now, of course, they've engaged us, they're a commercial customer. But again, 99% of all of those in the world are being calculated with Neo4j, which is an amazing, I think, innovation.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. So I understand, of course, with a market like this and a niche like this, whether you're the, originator or not, there's always going to be people that move into the space, especially this space. So what would you say differentiates Neo4j from other companies that may offer a similar service?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple of things, right? We've been around the longest. We coined the term graph database initially, right? And that means that, we have by far most of the biggest user base and the biggest customer base up and running in production. And databases is an interesting thing, right? Because there's some areas of technology, actually most areas of technology, where if you're new and modern, that's typically an advantage, right? Like if you build something like this year, you can build it in a fresh new way, and like you want it to be kind of the latest cool thing, right? On some level, right? It's a little bit kind of fashion, driven on some levels, especially in consumer software. Databases is not like that. With database, like you want it to be robust, you want it to be proven, because it's the heart, it's the foundation of everything that we do. Like it must never ever fall over, it must never ever lose data, right? And the fact that we have just been battle tested more than any other graph database on the planet is a massive thing. So that's kind of the first one. And then the second one is we have by far the biggest developer and data science community, right? And so this is, orders of magnitude bigger than any other graph database. And this means that there's just more developers to hire, there are more data scientists to hire, right? If you commit to, if you build something on top of Neo4j, any frameworks out there, any like programming frameworks, for example, any existing packages and applications, if they integrate with a graph database, it's more likely to be Neo4j than anything else. And a programming language, if they have bindings to Neo4j, it's to a graph database, it's more likely to be Neo4j, just by virtue of us being the most popular graph database. So there's a ton of other things, right, in terms of features and things like that. But those are kind of the key ones. I have to say, though, that our focus here at Neo4j is not so much on the competition, as it were, other vendors in the graph database space. We're focused on just getting the word out about graph databases. That's what we focus on, right? And then that's the most important thing, that people out there, when they build new applications, when they build new machine learning systems, that they know that graph databases are an option. And then we're very happy when they end up choosing Neo4j. But I think the most important thing is for them to know that graph databases are like a really viable and powerful alternative.
Okay, great. So you mentioned developers and data scientists. So do you have something that really, because that's obviously the, I don't want to say upper echelon, but the upper echelon of people that could really probably benefit from this software. Is there something that you have that really caters to that level of professionalism, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's two things. One is, I already mentioned, to the Neo4j Community Edition, which is you can go to neo4j.com and just download it, up and running right away on your laptop. Start importing your data, start playing around, whether you're a developer or a data scientist, which is amazing, right? And then more recently, and recently is maybe a very liberal term. It's like in the last couple of years type recently, right? We've launched a cloud service, which is called Neo4j Aura. So that's AURA, Aura. And that one is available. We have a free tier, which we launched just this summer. So you can go to neo4j.com/Aura and you just sign up, you put in your email address, and off you go. It's free forever, perpetual, free. And you don't have to operate data, like operate a database. You don't have to download software, anything like that. And it actually comes pre-built with data sets, right? And so we've talked about the Pandora Papers. So the organization behind the Pandora Papers, the ICIJ, they haven't yet released the actual data. They will. They're just busy handling all the press and all the investigations and all that kind of stuff right now. But they will release that data, and they're going to release it as raw data, but also in the form of a Neo4j database, which is really amazing. But so if you go and you sign up either to Aura, or we have a sandbox offering, which you'll see on neo4j.com as well, then you can actually choose that data set. Like the Pandora Papers, whenever they release it, but even today they have the Panama Papers. So you can go in there and you can look at, is Putin in here, right? Like, in the Pandora, sorry, in the Paradise Papers, which was the successor to the Panama Papers, like Queen Elizabeth was in there, right? You can go there, you can look for yourself, you can look for your neighbors, you can look for your boss, choose whoever, and you can just play around with it. It has a pre-built guide, and you can just get up and running. It's a great way to learn, how to use Neo4j and graph databases. And I mentioned the Pandora paper stuff. It also comes with like curated examples for recommendations, for fraud detection, where you could just really quickly get up and running. And so those are either download and use it locally, or use one of our cloud offerings, Neo4j Aura or the Sandbox.
Okay, so we were discussing, NASA and things like that. Of course, these developers and data scientists, but and I think you may have already answered this question, but if you could maybe just reiterate, like anyone can jump in Neo4j and utilize this software effectively.
That's exactly right. And it's completely free with the Community Edition, all open source, or the Aura free tier. And then once you put it into production, if you're a big company, there's a commercial edition, the Enterprise Edition, and the equivalent in our cloud service Aura, where you have a number of features that are really valuable if it's a mission critical enterprise-wide deployment. It's the kind of stuff that we would imagine, like clustering and failover and security features and compliance features and stuff like that. But in order to get started, just like this, go to neo4j.com and you can get up and running right away. Okay,
so with that being said, what advice do you have as the ultimate inside man on NEO4J to people that are looking to use your software and use it effectively?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. One is there are two books by O'Reilly that are really amazing. One is a little bit dated. It's, you know, whatever, 7-8 years old now or something like that. It's called just Graph Databases, and it's the standard kind of Bible, as it were, for graph databases. And while the actual APIs and the specific syntax maybe is a little bit dated, the concepts still apply. And then there's a more recent book, maybe a year or two ago, called Graph Algorithms, also from O'Reilly. And so those are great, you know, for developers and data scientists, just great books to get up and running with the concepts and start kind of to spin up your head around, you know, how to use Neo4j and graph databases most effectively. Those are great starting points. And then the second one, I just have to stress what I already mentioned. Books are amazing. Like, that's how we all love to learn in some levels. But man, nothing beats just hands-on getting up and running. And there's just really good built-in tutorials with Neo4j. So just go to neo4j.com and start download or sign up for the cloud service and start playing around hands-on. That's just the best way to get started in my mind.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's no better way to learn than to, you know, there's no quicker way to learn to swim than to jump in the water. It's pretty much.
That's exactly right.
You will figure it out really quick. So yeah, you know, I appreciate you joining us today, and maybe give us a little insight, or, you know, a little Easter egg or something about what's next for Neo4j.
Yeah, so we have a number of things coming out over the next several months, a number of key product releases that we're super excited about. Nothing that I can share, you know, in too much detail right now, as well as a number of really exciting events, both like a big virtual one, and then, knock on wood, hopefully a big face-to-face event to bring the graph community together. We ran the biggest event for the entire graph community. I mean, I guess with COVID, it's several years ago now, but we're hoping that 2022 is the year when we're bringing that finally back to meet face-to-face again. So we're really excited about that. So stay tuned for that one.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Emil, for joining us today. This was an incredible conversation. I really got a lot of very nice insight, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers are much more educated now. And I just want to say, anytime, if these things do roll out, or, you know, not if, but when they do roll out, please feel free to come back and have another discussion with us.
Absolutely. It was great to be here. Thanks, Chris.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, Tech Times viewers, as always, if you guys like what you see, you know, you can like, subscribe, share it if that's your thing, comment if it's not. It's all okay. We don't mind. We can take it. And also, any show of love or support is always accepted. So again, thank you very much for sticking with us. And, you know, we'll be dropping some more things here in the next couple of weeks. So thanks again, and see you next time.